Chapter 1. The Murk of Lakefoot. The lake didn't move. It simply sat there, still, black, endless, a sheet of oil beneath a sky that had long forgotten sunlight. A sour wind drifted across the shore, heavy with the smell of rot and rusted metal, stirring the reeds that rose like the fingers of drowned men. Crows circled overhead, their cries distant and hungry. On the far edge of the lake, where the fog draped thickest, an old aluminum fishing boat bobbed slightly, tethered by a rope more frayed than useful. Clancy Brigg, a man worn thin by years and whiskey, stood in the boat with a net in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He'd come out just before dawn, as he always did, chasing the foolish hope of one more decent catch before the season turned bitter. The mist licked at his boots. His bones ached. He'd muttered a prayer, not to God, but to something older, something the locals didn't name aloud. That's when he saw it. A shape, floating just beyond the reeds, bloated, pale. At first, Clancy thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or some poor swimmer. But the closer he drifted, the more wrong it became. It didn't move with the water. It didn't roll like a corpse should. It watched him, with no eyes. Clancy dropped the cigarette. His boot nudged the boat forward and the body bobbed in greeting, face up, mouth gaping in a silent scream. The sockets were hollow and dark, blood trailing like ink down the cheeks. The skin was greenish blue and slick with slime. The chest had been split open, not torn, but carved, as though with surgical precision. Ribs cracked outward like broken crab legs, and where the heart should have been was only a hole, ragged and pulsing with lake water. But it was the marks on the arms that made Clancy scream. 4 long gashes, symmetrical, ran down each forearm, webbed, spiral-like scratches etched deep into the flesh, as though something with fingers, long fingers, had grasped the man and pulled him down into the dark. Clancy vomited into the lake and rode back like a demon was behind him. Lakefoot, population 602, was the kind of town where rumors traveled faster than light and truth moved like molasses. Nestled in a forgotten cleft of moss-choked forest, it wore its age like a wound. Houses leaned on broken stilts, windows were fogged with grease. Every structure seemed to sag toward the lake, as if gravity itself was drawn to the black water. Sheriff Mara Rowen stepped onto the dock just after sunrise, the radio in her truck still hissing from Clancy's garbled call. She stood straight despite the cold, her boots crunching the frost-bitten wood beneath her. Her coat flapped against her legs, and the grip of her sidearm dug into her hip, a reminder that not everything in Lakefoot could be explained away with raccoons or gas leaks. "Tell me," she said. Clancy, hunched and shaking beside the coroner's van, pointed with a trembling hand. "It ain't natural, Sheriff. It looked at me, with no eyes. It looked at me." The paramedics fished the body from the water as gently as they could, but the damage was grotesque. Skin peeled like paper where the limbs bent. The mouth was stuffed with lakeweed. The corpse was already half swollen, but what was left was unmistakable. Michael Greeley, 27, a local trapper, who'd gone missing 3 nights ago after telling friends he was going night fishing alone. Now he was home, but in pieces. Mara crouched beside the stretcher, jaw tight. Her breath ghosted in the cold. She took in every detail, the clean excision of the heart, the smoothness of the torn skin, and the faint scent rising from the body. Not just decay. Something sour. Something alive. "Do these look like bite marks to you?" she asked the coroner. "No," he said, pale. "They're too orderly." The townspeople had already gathered by the time Mara arrived at the Rusted Lantern diner. Eyes turned to her, then quickly away. Conversations hushed. She passed cracked booths and low whispers, the scent of grease mingling with stale cigarette smoke. "Morning, Sheriff," muttered the waitress, setting down a black coffee with a shaking hand. Mara ignored the greetings. She found who she was looking for in the back booth, Old May Hollow, wrapped in shawls and secrets. Her eyes were cataract-blued, but sharp enough to see truth in lies and monsters in mist. A charm of bones hung from her neck, clinking softly as she stirred her tea. "You know what did this," Mara said. May didn't look up. "Course I do. So do you." Mara sat across from her. "Talk." "The lake remembers," May said, voice like gravel and smoke. "The lake keeps score. We dug too deep, took what wasn't ours. You think the water's just wet? It's got a soul, child. A soul and a hunger." Mara stared at her. "Who's we?" May chuckled. "Ask your granddaddy." "Oh, right. You can't. Ask the miners who built the tunnels under it. Ask the ones that came back babbling and blind. Ask the ones who didn't come back." She leaned closer. Her breath was warm and smelled of damp earth. "The lake takes back what we stole." Before Mara could ask more, the diner lights flickered. A low rumble rolled through the floor like thunder, but it wasn't from the sky. It came from beneath. That night the storm came. Not a gentle rain, not the kind that lulled you to sleep, but a violent, thrashing tempest that made the trees scream. Lightning carved the sky in jagged bursts, and the lake churned like a beast in its sleep. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled windows loose. Deputy Kyle was the first to see it. He was patrolling the east shore, spotlight sweeping over the shoreline, when he saw something bobbing against the rocks. He thought it was driftwood, until the lightning flashed and illuminated the bloated, pale form of a second corpse. He stumbled down the embankment, mud sucking at his boots, rain stabbing his eyes. The body was wedged between two rocks, limbs twisted, head lolling. He flipped it with a gloved hand and screamed. The face was gone. No eyes, no lips, no nose. Just smooth skin pulled tight like stretched hide. The chest was open, ribs snapped outward, no lungs, just black, rotted hollowness. The tongue had been ripped out, the throat stuffed with silt. Something moved beneath the surface. Something large. Kyle fell back, heart pounding, hands trembling on his flashlight. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Only the water, still and black and watching, like it always had. Chapter 2. Whispers Beneath the Water. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the clouds had not lifted. They sat heavy and swollen above Lakefoot, as if pressing the entire town downward into the mud and mist. Sheriff Mara Rowen stared at the lake from her office window. It did not ripple. It did not shimmer. No sunlight to catch, no breeze to disturb it. Just black water, flat as obsidian, waiting. The night's second corpse lay on the stainless steel slab in the morgue 2 floors below. Mara had stood over it for hours. She had stared into the empty sockets and at the hollowed-out chest cavity, feeling a pressure behind her eyes, a slow-growing pulse, as if something was calling her from under the water. Now, in daylight, she was no less uneasy. There was a file spread across her desk, a bundle of brittle papers from the county archives she'd requested in the dead of night. Yellowed photographs, grainy and smudged, showed a mining operation on the lake shore in 1923. Men in flat caps and suspenders smiled hollow smiles, faces already lined with exhaustion. Behind them, an enormous shaft plunged into the earth beside the waterline. The handwritten caption read, "Lakefoot Extraction Co. Project Shoreline." The mine was filled in and sealed 2 years later. Unsafe conditions, the official report had said. Seismic instability. But the whispers in town told a different story. Men disappearing underground, strange growths in their lungs, the sound of breathing echoing through the tunnels where no air should move. Mara flipped through the photographs. The last one showed nothing but the mouth of the mine, open and black as the lake. She shut the folder and rubbed her temples. That was when she noticed the envelope. No return address, no stamp. It had been slipped under her door while she'd slept at her desk. Inside were 6 torn pages, streaked with what she hoped was rust. The handwriting was frantic, slashed across the paper like claw marks. There's something under the lake. It isn't rock, it isn't earth, it breathes. The walls move when you touch them. There are eyes in the dark. A name signed at the bottom, Dr. Adrian Kell, a geologist from the State University who had gone missing last year while surveying the lakebed for sediment cores. The official story was, boating accident. The final line chilled Mara. It knows when you're near. She stared at the words until they blurred, the low hum of the radiator suddenly sounding like a heartbeat. By midday, the diner was packed again. Word of the second body had spread faster than the storm itself. Mara sat at the counter, not for the food but for the whispers. The locals always spoke more freely when they thought she wasn't listening. She caught fragments. Heart gone, like the others. Told you it wasn't done. When she turned, the room fell silent. Only the scrape of forks on plates filled the air. Then an older man at the far table coughed, spat phlegm into a napkin, and spoke without looking up. "Ain't no man did that." Another nodded. "It's her, the one in the water." Mara slid off her stool and walked to their table. "Her?" The first man lifted rimmy eyes. "She that waits below." The name hissed from his lips like a prayer. He spat again. "My granddaddy told me. His daddy told him. Before the miners came, the lake was smaller, the swamp thicker. They said a thing lived down there, big as a house, old as the mud. A woman once, maybe, or something wearing a woman's face. The old folk gave her animals, sometimes men, to keep her from crawling onto shore." The second man crossed himself. "She keeps herself alive by taking what's inside us. Hearts, lungs, eyes, piece by piece, so she don't rot." Mara stared at them. "A swamp monster." The first man's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "Call it what you want, Sheriff, but the water's hers, always has been." The words clung to her skin like damp cloth. She left before she could taste them on her tongue. That night, the sky pressed closer to the earth. The fog rose, thicker than before, curling in and out of the pine trunks like pale fingers. Somewhere out by the marsh, a boy's voice echoed between the trees. His name was Tyler Griggs, 16, high on adrenaline and YouTube dreams. He'd brought his phone, a ring light, and a dare from his friends. The lake had gone viral after the first body. Kids were showing up to film TikToks, hunting for ghosts. Tyler grinned into the camera. "Okay, guys, it's midnight, and we're at Lakefoot Swamp. People say there's a monster out here, but it's probably just..." Sound behind him. He spun the camera. Fog, reeds, black water. "Nothing. Just old folks trying to scare us," he finished, forcing a laugh. His breath came out in pale bursts. The reeds clicked softly, like teeth. He knelt by the water, scooping up a handful for the shot. "See? Totally safe." Then something moved under the surface. Just a ripple at first. Then another. Then a shape, darker than the water itself, gliding toward shore with unnatural smoothness. Tyler leaned closer. "Whoa!" A hand erupted from the water. It was not a human hand. The fingers were too long, jointed strangely, webbed with translucent flesh like a frog's foot, but tipped with claws that caught the faint light. It latched onto Tyler's wrist with a sound like wet leather tearing. Tyler screamed. The phone fell into the mud, still recording. The camera caught only flashes. Tyler's face twisted in panic, his arms thrashing as he was yanked toward the reeds. Another clawed hand broke the surface, clutching his ankle. He dug his fingers into the mud, clawing at the earth, leaving deep furrows as he tried to stop himself from being dragged into the black water. His nails ripped, blood streaking the ground. "No. No, please." His voice choked off as his head went under. The water surged, then went still. Only the sound of his phone buzzing in the mud remained. Screen cracked, lens smeared with his blood. For a moment the camera caught one last image, a shape just below the surface, pale and enormous, a face-like mask with hollow pits where eyes should be, staring up before sliding back into the dark. In town, Mara's phone buzzed on the nightstand. The caller ID read unknown. She answered to the sound of breathing. Slow. Wet. Heavy. Then it hung up. The house felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer, the hum of the refrigerator like a heartbeat, and from the direction of the lake, faint but distinct, came a sound she couldn't ignore, like something drawing in air. Slow. Hungry. Life. Chapter 3. The Caves of Bone. The rain hadn't touched the lake in days. It was as though the sky itself feared to disturb it. A heavy stillness lay over Lakefoot, smothering everything under its damp, mold-scented breath. Sheriff Mara Rowen stood at the end of the old dock, watching the surface. It did not move. It never moved, just reflected the world back in broken shards, like a mirror left too long in the dark. She clenched her fists in her coat pockets. The boy, Tyler Griggs, was still missing. Only his phone had been found, screen cracked, lens smeared with mud and streaks of blood, still recording a blank horizon until the battery died. The clip had gone viral online, but the town's signal was too weak for most of them to even see it. Mara had watched it 100 times. She had memorized the sound of his screams, the claw marks in the mud where he'd tried to dig himself free. Behind her a voice spoke, measured, deep, precise. "I ran sonar this morning. It's not just a lake." Dr. Elias Venn adjusted his glasses against the glare. He was an outsider, drawn to Lakefoot by its rising body count and older rumors. Cryptozoologist, explorer of monsters. His resume was lined with articles about living fossils and giant freshwater predators. But he didn't have the look of a fantasist. His eyes were pale and serious. Mara turned to him. "What do you mean, not just a lake?" He handed her a tablet. The screen showed a map of the lake bed, rendered in ghostly blue sonar lines. The depths were uneven, jagged, and beneath them, tunnels twisted like veins. "This isn't sedimentary rock," he said. "It's hollow, dozens of connected chambers under the lake descending into the bedrock, and something down there is moving." Mara stared at the screen. Moving. Elias's finger traced a cluster of blurry shapes. "See these? Pulses. They're huge, and they're clustered around an opening." She looked back at the water. "You're saying we go down. I'm saying if you want to know what's taking people, this is the only way." The boat rocked gently as they prepared. The air smelled of brine and copper. The lake was colder than it had any right to be. Fog rolled in, slow, muffling their movements. A pair of hired divers checked their rebreathers and lights with silent efficiency. Each had a harpoon gun strapped to their chest, false comfort against something they couldn't name. Mara adjusted her wetsuit. The neoprene felt like a second skin, heavy and foreign. She glanced at the divers. "How deep?" 70 feet to the cavern entrance, Elias replied. "Then it drops to at least 100. We'll stay shallow as long as we can." The divers dropped first, vanishing into the black water with twin splashes. Elias followed, his mask sealing with a hiss. Mara took one last breath of air that wasn't tainted with rot and stepped off the boat. The cold hit like a hammer. Darkness swallowed her. Her light beam cut through clouds of silt and algae, illuminating nothing but endless green-black water. Bubbles drifted upward like ghosts. They descended in silence, the only sound their own breathing. As they neared the bottom, the shape of the cavern loomed ahead, a gaping maw in the lake bed, its edges lined with pale growths that looked disturbingly like teeth. The water grew warmer as they approached, pulsing faintly against her skin like a heartbeat. Inside the cavern, the walls changed. At first, Mara thought it was limestone. Then her light struck a curve of something pale, and she realized she was staring at a human skull embedded in the wall. Not fossilized, fresh enough that strands of hair still drifted like weeds from the eye sockets. Another meter down, she saw ribs fused into the rock, femurs stacked like bricks, hands clutching nothing. The cavern walls were made of bone. Dozens, no, hundreds of human remains pressed together, their forms warped by pressure, silt filling their mouths. Some still had fingernails, some still had eyes. Elias's voice crackled through the calm. Jesus. The diver's lights swept over the carvings between the bones, symbols etched deep into the ivory lattice, circles inside circles, interlocking spirals, a long vertical slash that could have been a face without features. The carvings writhed in the torchlight, optical illusions of movement. "It's a temple," Elias whispered. "Or a nest." Something brushed Mara's leg. She swung her light down, nothing but a cloud of silt. But the water trembled around her. Then one of the divers screamed. Bubbles exploded from his regulator as he twisted, harpoon gun firing into darkness. The line went taut, then slack. He jerked backward, mask shattering against the bone wall. His scream became a gurgle as something invisible dragged him deeper into the cavern. Mara lunged forward, but the water pulled him away like a riptide. His light vanished in seconds. The second diver's lamp flared wildly. "It's behind us!" Something struck him from above. His mask cracked. His hands clawed at his face as blood clouded the water. Mara grabbed his arm, but he convulsed violently, tearing free. He shot upward, thrashing. Mara saw his face for one frozen moment before he disappeared into the dark shaft above. His eyes were gone, empty sockets stuffed with writhing green moss that pulsed like gills. He vanished, screaming. Elias yanked Mara back, dragging her toward the exit. The cavern around them began to pulse, the walls of bone shifting as if something behind them was breathing. Her light caught something massive just at the edge of visibility, a limb, jointed and slick, ending in a clawed hand. Another limb slid along the ceiling like a centipede, and a face, or a mask of a face, pale and eyeless, rising from the dark, its mouth stretching open wider than a man was tall. Mara and Elias burst from the cavern mouth, ascending like bullets. The water fought them, thick and warm. Her lungs burned. She imagined fingers closing around her ankles, pulling her back down. They broke the surface, gasping, clawing at the boat's side. The surviving diver was gone. The lake was still. Only the fog moved. By evening, the town had changed. Half the houses along Main Street were shuttered. Cars packed with belongings lined the single highway out of town. But the roadblocks had already begun. At the first curve, Mara found the sign ripped from its post and nailed back with something slick and red. As she drew closer, she saw what held it there. 3 severed hands, nailed through the palms into the wood, fingers curled like claws. The blood was fresh. Another mile up, a woman's headless body was propped against a guardrail, arms spread, chest cavity empty. A warning. The highway smelled of iron. That night, Mara didn't sleep. She sat upright in her office, staring at the lake through the window, the torn journal pages from Dr. Kell spread across her desk. Her eyelids drooped, heavy. And then she saw it. A dream. or not. The lake opened like a wound, black water peeling back to reveal a chasm beneath. Something rose slowly from its depths, slick with algae and blood, taller than the trees, tentacles uncoiling from a torso shaped almost human but far too long, far too thin. His head was a pale mask with hollow eyes, a mouth that split from ear to ear and dripped dark water like oil. She could smell it, even in her dream. Salt, rot, wet moss. She felt the pull of it in her chest, like her heart wanted to leave her body and go to it. It opened its mouth wider, wider, until she could see the shapes of faces inside its throat. Faces she knew. Clancy, Tyler, the diver, all of them screaming silently from its flesh. When she woke, the sound of breathing was still in the room. Slow, wet, heavy, and the lake was no longer still. Chapter 4. Offerings and Blood. The first sign was the candles. Mara noticed them when she drove back into town at dusk, tiny points of fire flickering along windowsills, down porches, at the foot of driveways, hundreds of them, the town glowing like a field of dying stars. There was no wind, yet the flames leaned toward the lake as if drawn. Her stomach twisted. She had been up for nearly 48 hours, mind blurred by the images she'd seen in the cavern. The bones, the carvings, the eyeless shape moving just beyond her light. She had told herself she'd find answers in town. Instead, she found silence. Main Street was deserted. The diner's blinds were drawn. The church doors hung open but dark. The only sound was the faint slap of water against the dock. She parked at the sheriff's office, stepping out into air that tasted of iron. The scent of it coated the back of her throat. As she reached for the door handle, a voice behind her murmured, "Sheriff." She turned. May Hollow stood in the middle of the street, wrapped in her shawls, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. A ring of people stood behind her, faces she knew, faces she'd grown up around, men who'd fixed her truck, women who'd fed her at church suppers. They were barefoot, their hands painted with dark symbols that writhed when she looked too long. Mara's hand went to her sidearm. "What's happening?" May smiled, a slow, cracked smile. "It's time." "Time for what?" "To make things right," May said. "Your family broke the pact, now you'll mend it." Before Mara could draw, two men rushed her from behind. A cloth reeking of swamp water clamped over her face. She fought, kicking, twisting, nails raking skin, but there were too many hands. They dragged her down, the world narrowing to candlelight and shadows. She woke in the old mining shaft. The air was cold and damp, walls dripping with condensation, roots snaked through the timbers. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope that stank of brine. Around her, the townsfolk moved like ants in a nest, carrying bundles, chanting under their breath. Their words were low and rhythmic, a language older than any she knew, like the sound of water running backward. They had turned the shaft into a temple. Animal skulls hung from the beams. In the center of the cavern lay a trough filled with dark water, its surface shivering as though something beneath was exhaling. The smell of blood and salt was overpowering. Mara struggled against her bindings. "You're insane. You're feeding it." May stepped into view, holding a dagger carved from bone. "We're keeping it asleep. It is a protector, Sheriff. Protector from the deep time. Before men, before beasts, before even the trees. It kept the world in balance. Your kin woke it, and it's been starving ever since." She knelt beside Mara. "You were chosen before you were born. That's why you came back." Mara's vision blurred. Flashes of memory rose unbidden. Her grandfather's hand clamped tight around hers as they walked the old trails. his whispered warnings to never look at the water at night. The smell of wet stone when he came home from the mine, the fear in his eyes he never explained. She had thought it all superstition. Now she realized it was inheritance. May touched her cheek, the bones of her charm rattling. Blood calls to blood. The chanting grew louder. The townsfolk formed a circle, their bare feet stamping the wet stone in unison. Drums began, made from stretched animal hides, beaten with bone sticks. Shadows flickered across the walls, stretching into shapes not quite human. Elias stood at the edge of the circle, hands bound, face pale. Blood trickled from his lip where someone had struck him. His eyes met Mara's. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. The trough began to bubble. The water turned blacker than ink, thick as tar. Something rose from it, a tentacle, pale and slick, the size of a tree trunk. It slapped against the stone, leaving a smear of greenish slime. Another followed, curling upward to the ceiling. The smell was indescribable. Wet metal and rotting seaweed, sweet and rancid all at once. The water split open. A torso emerged, draped in kelp, its skin stretched tight over impossible bones. Faces were stitched into its flesh, dozens of them, mouths open in silent screams, eyes sewn shut with strands of moss. Its head was not a head but a mask of pale cartilage, with no eyes, only a cavernous mouth that yawned wider and wider as it rose. The chanting became frenzied. May lifted the dagger high. "Protector from the deep time, we offer back what was stolen." She cut Mara's ropes and seized her arm, dragging her toward the trough. The crowd surged with her, hands reaching, their faces blank with devotion. Mara kicked, twisting, teeth bared. "You're all gonna die!" May hissed, spittle on her lips. "We already have." The tentacle slid closer, the stitched faces along it twitching as if trying to speak. It reached for Mara's chest. At the last moment she wrenched free, grabbing May's dagger. The bone handle was slick, but she drove it into the arm of the man holding her. He screamed, blood spraying across her face. She spun, slashing another across the throat, and bolted toward the shaft entrance. Elias shouted, "Go!" but hands dragged him back toward the trough. Mara hesitated for half a heartbeat, then ran. The tunnel walls pulsed like a throat as she climbed. Behind her, the chanting became shrieks. She looked back once and saw the thing rise higher, its mouth opening to reveal an inner ring of teeth, its tentacles coiling around Elias. His scream echoed through the shaft as he vanished beneath the water. Mara scrambled upward, slipping on the wet timbers, blood dripping from her hands. The earth shook. Stones fell. She burst out into the open night, gasping, collapsing in the mud. Below, the lake churned. Something massive shifted beneath the surface, its shape breaking the water for a moment, towering, slick, covered in kelp and stitched faces, its eyeless mask turning toward her. The candles along the shore blew out all at once, and the sound that rose from the lake was not a roar but a wordless hunger, a sound older than speech. Mara ran. Chapter 5. The Drowning God. The lake was no longer still. It writhed now, alive in a way it had never been before, its surface swelling and sinking like the breath of some colossal beast. Waves lapped at the muddy shore with a sound like labored panting. Dead fish floated belly up across the water, their eyes clouded, their bodies sliced open by unseen claws. Sheriff Mara Rowen stood at the edge, staring into the blackness. The candles were gone, the houses were empty. Lakefoot had become a ghost town. Only the sound of water and distant cries, echoes of something deeper, remained. Her hands shook as she loaded the final brick of C4 into her waterproof bag. The explosives were old but functional, scavenged from a highway demolition crew upstate. She'd memorized the timing. She'd memorized the path. She had one goal left: close the wound, bury it. Her wetsuit clung to her like a funeral shroud. The smell of kelp and blood clung to the fog. She took a single breath of night air and stepped into the water. It was warm now, unnaturally warm, like stepping into the mouth of an animal. The silt churned around her calves as she waded deeper. She thought of Elias, his scream echoing in the cavern, his face disappearing beneath the stitched flesh of the thing that had claimed him. She would finish this, or drown with it. The descent into the cavern was worse this time. The light from her headlamp barely cut the murk. Schools of eyeless fish drifted past, their translucent bodies crisscrossed with veins, their mouths opening and closing soundlessly. The water itself seemed thicker, pulsing against her skin with each stroke. She passed the entrance where the walls of bone began. They were different now. The bodies were fresher. She saw faces she recognized from town, neighbors, store clerks, children. They stared through her with sewn mouths and moss where their eyes had been. Hands jutted from the walls, fingers curling as though reaching for her. Her stomach lurched, but she kept swimming, guided by the sonar map burned into her memory. The passages opened into the central chamber, and she saw it. The drowning god. It filled the cavern like a tumor. Its bulk pulsed against the walls, pale skin slick with slime and veined with black. Tentacles drifted in the water like kelp in a current, each lined with stitched faces and reaching hands. Its torso was vaguely human but impossibly long, its chest a lattice of exposed ribs through which something glowed faintly. Hearts. Dozens of hearts, still beating, suspended in strands of dark moss. Its head, or what passed for one, rose from the center. A mask of pale cartilage stretched into a grotesque semblance of a woman's face, eyeless but somehow aware. The mouth opened slowly, splitting wider and wider until the inner ring of teeth glistened like wet needles. Beneath it, anchored to the cavern floor, was Elias, or what remained of him. His body was half wrapped in moss, veins of kelp running under his skin. His limbs had elongated, joints bent at inhuman angles. His eyes were pits filled with dark water, yet he still recognized her. "Mara!" His voice echoed through the water, not through sound, but inside her skull. "You came back!" Her breath caught in her regulator. "You don't have to fight it," Elias said, or the thing wearing his voice. His hands trembled as he reached toward her, the skin of his arms splitting into strands like seaweed. "It can make you whole. It can make us whole. It's been waiting for you." The drowning god shifted, its tentacles curling slowly, the stitched faces along them twitching in something like anticipation. Mara raised her detonator, fingers tight. "I'm not yours," she said. Elias's expression twisted, torn between pleading and hunger. "It's not what you think. It's older. It's everything. Join us." His voice cracked. "Join me." He drifted closer, arms outstretched. The moss on his chest opened like gills, exposing something beating inside. His heart, or something else. Mara remembered her grandfather's eyes, the smell of wet stone on his coat, his whispered warnings. "Never look at the water at night. Never go where it breathes." She remembered Tyler's scream. She remembered Elias's hand slipping from hers as the tentacles took him. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The first charge detonated deeper in the tunnel with a dull thump. A cloud of silt and bone fragments burst outward. The cavern trembled, pebbles raining down like hail. The drowning god's mouth opened wide enough to split its chest, a soundless bellow rattling her teeth. Its tentacles lashed toward her. Harakati Stratopis took. She kicked hard, swimming upward as the second charge went off. Another section of the cavern collapsed, crushing a coil of tentacles beneath tons of rock. The water roared around her like a living thing. Elias screamed, not in her head this time, but through his distorted mouth, bubbles spilling from his lips. The moss peeled from his face as he lunged for her. She triggered the last charge. The cavern imploded. A wall of black water and bone surged upward, slamming her toward the exit. She clawed at the stone, lungs burning, her body striking jagged ribs of bone. Her mask cracked, filling with warm water. She could feel the pressure of the god behind her, a mass of tentacles and teeth trying to drag itself through the collapsing tunnels. She burst from the cavern mouth as the entire structure caved in. For a moment she saw it, the drowning god pressed against the closing walls, its eyeless face staring at her, its mouth stretching into something like a smile. Elias floated beside it, reaching, before the rocks swallowed them both. The water rushed upward, carrying her to the surface. She broke through, gasping, dragging herself onto the half-submerged dock. Behind her, the lake convulsed as though something massive was thrashing beneath. Then it went still. The sky was pale. The town was silent. Only the smell of salt and blood remained. Mara lay on her back, staring at the clouds. Her hands were trembling. The detonator was gone. The wetsuit was shredded. She closed her eyes and listened. Nothing. A year later, the lake was quiet again. The state had cordoned off Lakefoot as a hazardous site. Most of the town had relocated. The candles were gone, the houses collapsing into rot. But one morning, a fisherman found a body floating near the old dock. It was fresh, young, unmarked except for the missing heart. And when they rolled it over, its face was smiling.